All right, let's move on to that absolute travesty of a basketball game that was Philly rolling up into Miami, repeatedly getting punched in the face and doing absolutely nothing about it. And just sitting there and saying, I'll take another one right here. That was a very, very strange basketball game. And you guys know me, I like to get into the weeds. It's the way that I like to break down the game. I like to talk X's and O's. I like to talk about counters. I like to talk about coverages. I like to talk about all that stuff. Here's the problem. I can't talk about any of that stuff if the team isn't trying. I can't talk about the way Miami's coverage was working or not working, or the way Philly's coverages were working or not working when one of the teams mailed in that basketball game. Think of it like this, like James Harden, who is pretty, he has an established reputation as a guy that can shrink away from big games more often than not. Game 4, what he did was the unusual circumstance, right? He was the best Sixer today by a mile. He was the only guy that looked like he cared about what was happening on the floor. He wasn't fantastic defensively, but nobody was. But at least on the offensive end, he was repeatedly applying rim pressure, getting feet into the paint. Pretty much everything James Harden initiated went well, and anything anybody else did went poorly. I want to give some credit to Miami before we move on. Miami's you just know going into that game that they're not going to mail it in, right? They're well coached. They're disciplined. From training camp on, they're a team that is committed to effort. I've been low on Miami all year because I don't think they have the top-end talent to compete with some of the best teams in the league. I think Jimmy Butler's probably like the 6th best player remaining in this playoff field, so I'm not as high on Miami as other people. But if there's one thing you could say about Miami, they're not going to leave points on the table. They're not going to leave opportunities on the table. They are going to squeeze their sponge to get every drop of potential success that team can get out. Whereas Philly feels like the exact opposite of that. So credit to Miami. Credit to Eric Spoelstra. Jimmy Butler continues to be the best player in this series. Even though I think Joel Embiid's a better player than him overall. Yeah, Jimmy's been the better player in the series. He's been fantastic. We're not going to get into it right now, but I'm incredibly intrigued by a potential Boston Celtics Miami Heat Eastern Conference Finals. I think it's going to be a defensive slugfest for the ages. But we're not going to get into that right now. Miami's an interesting team, but today the story is Philly. Today the story is Philly in a 2-2 series going into a game where Miami clearly approached it as if it was a must-win game. The opportunity to swing the series. Whereas Philly seemed to go into it like, it's cool, we got game 6 in Philly. We'll get him in game 7. Which, guess what? You're not guaranteed to get game 6. Which is exactly why you have to treat game 5 like a must-win and come out with the requisite effort. It's just embarrassing from Philly down the line. Like I said, James Harden was the best effort on the table on the team. I have to be very critical of Joel Embiid today, and here's why: because Joel Embiid fancies himself as one of the best basketball players in the world. Joel Embiid thinks he deserved to win MVP. Joel Embiid thinks that when you guys are at the sports bar or at work or wherever it is that you're talking basketball, he thinks that his name should come up first when you're ranking basketball players. Here's the problem with that, Joel. There's an expectation that comes with that. The guy that you're pissed off got the MVP over you, there wasn't a single moment in that series against the Warriors where you felt like he wasn't caring. That you felt like he was mailing in the game. And I get that he's injured. I get that he's banged up. He's got stuff going on with his thumb. He's got stuff going on with his face. But here's the thing. Did anybody cut Steph Curry slack in 2016 for playing on a sprained knee? Did anybody cut LeBron slack for playing with back spasm and knee tendonitis in 2015? Did anybody cut Giannis slack in 2021 last year when he literally inverted his knee in the conference finals? Did anybody cut him any slack when he fell down 2-0 to the Phoenix Suns in the finals? No. Because again, no one's saying the injuries aren't a factor, but everyone's dealing with stuff. Jimmy Butler missed a playoff game in this series with knee stuff. Everyone's banged up. Everyone's dealing with stuff. And no one's going to cut you slack for your stuff, especially when you fancy yourself one of the best players in the world. This is the standard that comes with being in that conversation. Is there any chance in the world that in Game 5 tomorrow, you think Giannis is going to roll up into Boston and lay down and just get beat? There's no way. I think Boston's going to win big tomorrow. But I know for a fact Giannis is going to come out like the Tasmanian devil trying to do everything he can to impact that game. And look, maybe that's the kind of guy Embiid is. Maybe he's the guy that some nights he feels it, some nights he doesn't. Chris Haynes talked about in the broadcast, he talked about going up to him in shoot around. And in shoot around, he said he was distancing himself from the team, not talking to anybody, very short-spoken, would only make small talk with Chris Haynes, wouldn't elaborate on anything. Chris Haynes went over to the coaching staff and was like, "Is Joel sick?" And they're like, "No, he's fine." So he was pouting today about who knows what. Pouting about the injuries, I don't know. Pouting about the MVP, I don't know. The guys from inside the NBA on TNT certainly took their chance to get all over Embiid for potentially pouting about the MVP, which is, look, I'm not going to jump to that conclusion, but whatever it is that's bothering you, there's no doubt that like these kinds of things can have an effect on you mentally. But here's the thing. All the guys at the top of the league also are dealing with that kind of stuff. And again, this is why I am so slow to push guys above established guys at the top of the league. This is why I want to see year in, year out success. This is why I waited till Giannis' second dominant postseason before I put him as my guy that I think is the best player in the world. Like if we start looking at the Joel Embiid stuff in his playoff career since 2017 to 2018, he's 27-12 in the regular season, goes down to 24-11 in the playoffs. It's a pretty significant drop-off. 24 points per game is not a dominant offensive player in the NBA playoffs. You know, like, I'll cut you some slack for that Boston series 2 years ago. You were overmatched. Ben Simmons was out. You had no business losing to the Atlanta Hawks. Ben Simmons or not. Passing up on a dunk or not. You had no business losing to the Atlanta Hawks. If you swap Giannis for Embiid in that series, does anybody think that the Sixers are losing to the Atlanta Hawks? It's just, this is the standard we have to hold the guys to at the top of the league. And look, and it's not just about the scoring. Like, Embiid was embarrassingly bad on defense tonight. Embarrassingly bad. I have some clips on my Twitter feed you can look at. He's just like passively kind of waving at guys as they come into the lane. He's not Miami cannot score against Philly in the half court when Joel Embiid is engaged as a rim protector. We saw that in games 3 and game 4. But the mark of greatness, the mark of being the best guy, is that you do it in game 5 too. Maybe you miss shots. Maybe your field goal percentage doesn't look great. Maybe you have some sloppy turnovers. That kind of thing can happen on a game in, game out basis. But your effort, you're attacking the basketball game, that has to be the same every single night. And if it's not, you can't be in that conversation. And look, it's not over for Joel Embiid. I'm not trying to... This isn't like a James Harden situation where we have a decade of evidence that this guy just kind of struggles in these settings. This isn't that type of deal. But what it is yet another playoff round where Philly looks like they're probably going to lose to a team that they were very capable of beating. And their best player doesn't seem to be doing anything about it. And again, it's like maybe he goes into game 6 and he dominates, and maybe he goes into game 7 and he dominates, and then you know what? I'll get up on here and I'll credit him for dominating. But the type of guy who would dominate game 6 and game 7 in this series is the same type of guy that would have come into game 5 tonight and attacked the Miami Heat, and he just didn't. And it's just disappointing. Like, you are mad that you didn't get named MVP, but the guy who got named MVP seems to care more about his team winning playoff games than you do at this point. That's a problem, man. And again, I understand the injuries, but it's just try to convince Jimmy Butler, who missed a playoff game this year with a sore knee, that you should be cut some slack because of injuries. Try to convince Giannis. Try to convince all these guys that have long, dominant playoff runs despite having a bad injury. It's part of the game. Yours is not debilitating. Your lower body is fine. You're mobile. You can move. You can protect the freaking rim, which is your job on this defense. It's just embarrassing. And I'm just disappointed. I'm disappointed because, you know, for a guy who's as ambitious as he is to try to be at the top, you'd think he'd take that a little bit more seriously. But it is what it is. I'm sorry I don't have more like in the details, X's and O's stuff to get into in this game. I just don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth it when you have a team that comes in and mails it in like that. So, I mean, is the series over? No, but you'd be stupid to pick anybody but Miami at this point because Philly is demonstrating to you right in front of us that they don't want it as bad. So, there you go. It is what it is. But yeah, like I at this point, I think you have to pick Miami. And I'm just disappointed in Joel Embiid. And I hope at some point he understands that this kind of performance is not okay if you're going to be considered one of the top guys.